Okay, let me introduce our first speaker, Kevin Fitch, K4 KCF. Kevin is a professor of biology at Matlow College. In addition to being a ham, he is also a volunteer firefighter where situational awareness is critical. He's here to talk about situational awareness and tactical communication. Please welcome Kevin.
Thanks for coming this morning. It's really early, and I appreciate the opportunity to give this presentation to you guys. I gave this presentation to the Rutherford County folks about a year ago, and at that time I was the planning section chief for the Aries group over there, and so one of the tasks I was doing was doing training. So we were doing some on-the-air training, we were doing incident command training on the air, so it's breaking down ICS 100 and 200 into little modules that were about 10 minutes each, and we would read that stuff over the air. The whole genesis of this project basically kind of came into play with, I'm also a volunteer wildland firefighter, and we're kind of different than the structure guys. This is the equipment we carry on a regular basis, and literally you're wearing nothing more than no-mech shirt and pants. It's just like jeans and a flannel shirt, except it's fire resistant. So we can look over this stuff later, and I have a couple things to show you as we go through the presentation. Well, I was going through training this year, and I went through this module in here, and this was, let's see here. Oops, it jumped. Sorry, I hit it twice there. What we have here is the National Wildfire Coordinating Group's L180 class. And that class is specifically tailored to wildland firefighters within the fire service for the country. So this is a federal level class. This class is got a lot of different things in it. So it took 8 hours to kind of go through it. There's some interactive stuff, but there was one module in here which was on situational awareness and tactical communications. And I was like, that really is important for the radio communicator for the job that we do as Aries operators. And I thought I would adapt that for the class for the Aries group in Rutherford County. And what I did was basically took that information, changed a few things around a little bit to make it tailored better towards the ham radio community. Then I ran it by some friends of mine. I have a buddy who's a career police officer. He's taught criminal justice at our college in the past, and he's come over and he's back as a full-time law enforcement officer. And then I have a couple of friends who were special forces. And I had them look this presentation over, and they basically gave the thumbs up, wish they had gotten that earlier themselves. So you as a ham radio operator, I know many of you probably have a lot more experience than I do. I've been a wildland firefighter since 1998. I've been doing tactical communications since that time, although I've only been a ham radio operator for 2 years. So as I tell my students, I don't know what you don't know, okay? So if you have a question, ask me that question. I also don't know what you know. And because of that, if you have an anecdote or a comment or a question to share to help enrich this entire class, this is basically an open format. So interrupt me at any point, and then the presentation will continue along that line. With situational awareness, I'm going to go back one more slide. This thing's a little touchy.
Is that not working?
It's not right now. Back me up one. There you go. So again, if you're interested in the class, it's L180, Human Factors in the Wildland Service. Now, if you are an experienced operator, and most of us in this room probably are to some extent, don't just be like, oh yeah, I've heard all this. This presentation is a mindset presentation. So all of us are Elmers at one point or another. So consider this as education as an Elmer to share with the folks that you're helping out. So point them in this direction to this, help them think about how they communicate on the air. This is not rag chewing, as we know. I was talking to Jeff a minute ago about how tactical communications they're very concise. They have to be very clear. And not in Jeff's case, certainly, but in other cases, they can almost seem rude sometimes. And we have to kind of throw out that decorum out the window when it comes to tactical communications. Interrupt somebody is kind of the rule with that. Do a break if there's something really critical that needs to be shared. As an example, when I first started with the ham radio community, we were having a net, it was a weather net, and someone broke in and said funnel cloud approaching West Smyrna. 5 minutes later, the NOAA weather radio went off. That was the differential between the real-time information, the tactical communication, and then the bureaucratic levels that had to go through to make it to the NOAA weather radio. So I thought that was really profound. That's a huge lead time when it comes to something like that. In our business, as a wildland firefighter, again, I'm a teacher, that pays the bills, but the wildland firefighting is for fun. I've been volunteering with the state for a while now. We are tactically communicating all the time. Basically, we have a snag on fire, it's near the line, near drop point 4. And that's all the information we require, because if no one's near drop point 4, they don't need to necessarily worry about it in the short term, but if they end up going past drop point 4, they're going to be looking for it. And so that kind of information is shared. Those of us with law enforcement, with military experience, with real structure firefighter experience, or even wildland fire experience, you know the type of tactical communication. This isn't necessarily that kind of presentation. It's more of a mindset about how to categorize some of the things within situational awareness and tactical communications. All right. Advance me 1, sir. So it's handy to start with a definition of situational awareness. I just pulled a random definition off the web. It's the use of sensory information. That's your eyes, your ears, your nose, your spidey senses, if you will. Because we all have those. Something's up over here. You feel something, and you go check it out. And often you're right with those things. It depends on your discipline, though. Then the military has one. It involves being aware of what's happening around you, taking everything into account, and adjusting your behavior in the here and now, but also projecting that into the future for your coworkers and your families. So being able to project those things into the future, that's what weather nets are really all about in the ham radio community, is thinking about how you're going to take the current information. What is the CAPE? What are the winds going to do? What's the feedback we're getting from NOAA on the weather coming in? All that's part of our situational awareness. Okay, so let's look at some barriers to situational awareness. There's external ones. It can be noisy. I can't tell you how many times I have been on the radio and there's a pumper unit running. And when I say pumper unit, we have pickup truck-based ones. That's an engine. That's a fire engine in the wildland community. We have gators with 80-gallon pumper units in them with little Honda engines on top of them. And those things are loud. Chainsaws are loud. Leaf blowers are loud. And we have those engines on the fire line. Those are external barriers we have to deal with all the time. So there's often repeats on tactical information. Or it's often understood that if somebody's running that gator or leaf blower, then they may not hear that radio signal. And so somebody else might need to be kind of running guard for them, if you will, during those moments. Heat and humidity, you know how that is here. It's oppressive. Was it 99% of Southerners suffer from swamp butt? Have you ever heard that term? It's terrible here in August, as you know. Imagine sitting in a hot tent behind a radio, sweating your butt off in August. Okay, it's going to be an external barrier, which is going to affect your attention span for sure. And then equipment failures, weak signals, QRN on the signal as well. Again, many of us have had those things. Again, this is about noise. And ask for fills, ask for repeats. How do we do this? We observe better. We listen better. We ask questions. Something we often forget to do. But if you don't have something, ask a question. When I give a weather report, and that's my job in the fire line, is I'm doing weather every hour. And when I'm giving a weather report and I don't hear anybody else call back, I call somebody way over on the other side of the unit and I go, Kevin the Murray, we use informal communications on the line, by the way, Kevin the Murray, and he goes, I got a good copy on that weather, because he knows already what I'm asking. He just forgot to key up and say that he could hear it. The reason why I asked the guy furthest away is because he's going to have the weakest signal, because we're simplex with this stuff. And then knowing your equipment, that's what the drills on a week-by-week basis are for, is knowing our equipment. All right, your internal barriers. What's your attention span like? How long has it been since your last cup of coffee? How long's your shift been? That type of thing. Is it 2:30 in the morning? Think about doing a weather net at that time of day. It's not a lot of fun to do it at that time of day. So what's your attention span then? Your attitude, what do you bring to the table? Is it cup half full or otherwise? Your background stresses. What's your background stress in life? You're going to filter things, how you view things. You're going to set the tone. And each of us is a leader when it comes to these types of things, although there'll be times when we're followers, and we're going to mention that in a second. But you approach every situation with that leadership potential in a leadership fashion. and you're going to set the tone when you do that. Leave your bad attitude back at home if you can do that. So we filter things. How do you view different people? We heard all these kinds of people. We have a radio know-it-all out there. Everyone knows who it is. I'm just being facetious a little bit, but you know somebody who's going to correct everyone on their errors on the radio. I've heard it myself. You also have a gentleman who'll be reporting lightning in their county during a weather net. And so you guys have really, I've been impressed listening to your weather nets at how you handle those types of individuals. It's beautifully done. But we need to all learn this, as a sense, anyone watching this video as an example, needs to learn this, that you don't just humiliate that person or something like that. You take their information, you thank them for it. So that's setting the attitude and setting the tone. And as well, work on your followership, something we talk about on the fire line. I have 24 years of experience burning. The people who are the burn boss have less than I do, because I've been at it a lot longer. I don't work for the state, I'm a volunteer, so I follow their leadership. And so I really have to focus on followership. I don't want to step out in front of them, because I don't need to in this case. I trust them. They're very good individuals. But when I do see an error, it doesn't hold me back either. I share that information immediately. We see things from time to time. People have lapse in judgment. And like I said, this could be a fire outfit if it were Nomex. And what we see here is my sleeves are rolled up. All right, if you're lighting grassy fuels, you probably want these sleeves down and cuffed, because you want that Nomex covering your forearms and get your gloves on. So you may see some, hey, put your gloves on, buddy, because it's going to get hot. You might tell people that, especially with the newer firefighters on the line. All right, let's get this to advance. Okay, so complacency. These are terms that you can think about yourselves through. Basically push yourself through that lens of each of these words and think about, have you ever been guilty of any of these things? Have you gotten complacent? It's easy to do. End of the day, you're tired, you're thirsty, you're hungry, you're hot, you want to go home. And you kind of get complacent at that time of day. It's easy to do. And in our business, we're doing mostly controlled burning. So, that's when we got to go, okay, somebody get the gator and go back around the unit, make sure it didn't slop over on some other part of the line. And lo and behold, that's when it slopped over. That's just the nature of what we do. We have to not ever be complacent. Younger fellows especially, they have the invulnerability, and you will see that in some of the younger hams out there. You got to watch for that as well. Most of us have been right-sized more than once in our lives. And so, embracing that is important. Anti-authority. I have 50 years of experience. Good. You're still not net controlled today. And so you have that type of thing going on. You might have someone pushing back, and then younger people, they can be anti-authority because they're not used to developing their followership. Impulsiveness. How many of us have been impulsive at one point or another in our lives? Okay? Yeah. It's just something we've done. Macho, arrogant. Come on. That's part of our nature, if you will. Resigned to something. We can't do anything about this now. Giving up is what that kind of means. And recognizing that as well. You don't want resignation. And then groupthink. You don't want to just follow along because someone else told you to do it either. You got to think about this. And I know some of you have law enforcement experience in here, and you're probably thinking about some examples. That said, if you have examples to share, please let me know. If you have questions, raise your hand. And then the last one on here, probably the most sinister of all, is the escalation of commitment. And that basically means where you have said, we've come too far now to give up. And so you extend the amount of risk beyond the reasonable level that you're going to take. You know how dangerous it is to cut down a dead tree, right? Okay, try cutting a dead tree down that's on fire. It's a lot more dangerous because when it falls, it's completely unpredictable. And how it falls apart is completely unpredictable. It's exponentially worse to do that. And so you have to line out how you approach that tree very, very carefully and take the time to cut yourself escape routes. You might be under the gun to get something done, but you still got to, if you're on the saw, you still got to cut yourself the escape routes. You may not have but one other person with you. Our protocol is 2 other people. In case something happens, you need 2 people on safety when you're doing that. That takes up 3 firefighters. to do that. And if you don't have that third person, you need to wait. You need to come up with a different plan. You don't just say, let's just get it done, because then you're taking unnecessary risks when you do that. Does that make sense? Okay. Again, this is all about mindset. It's a reminder of things many of us knew probably decades ago. Non-environmental stress is part of this. We're going to just look at stress for just a minute, just sort of breaking out the components of it. Background stress. Think about, as you're communicating as the Aries operator, you need to realize you're going to eventually be communicating for police, for fire, and for military, and for federal government. And so you got to realize the background stress they bring to the equation as well as your own. They have family problems just like we do. They have problems with their bills, their car broke down, water's leaking at the house, whatever it is. Those background stresses, they start the response at that level, and then they go up from there. So managing those in the front end is really important. And then there's the duty stresses, the environmental ones. Police officers been shot at already earlier in the day. Okay, they're basically, endorphin levels, their adrenaline levels are going to be a lot higher, and their stress levels will be higher for it. We have a fitness protocol we follow as firefighters. It's not the same as structure firefighters or military or special forces. Everyone has their own thing going for that. We don't have that for the ham radio community, although I'm an advocate for physical fitness. So, at least walking 3 times a week is the bare minimum. Get that exercise. Check with your doctor. I'm not a doctor. I just play one on TV. So, with that, think about your fitness level. The more fit you are, the better the responder you'll be, regardless of what you're responding to. Your pressures, get it done, get it done, get it done, or the pressures around you. You may be an auxiliary to the EOC or even in the EOC. There may be a lot of background stress already in the EOC, and you're adjacent to it. It can spill over into your group as well. Environmental conditions change. I do weather on the line. So, we use these Kestrels, really nice devices. Relative humidity, wind speed, and direction are blood pressure, heart rate, and ventilation, okay? That's what it is on the fire. And that's basically how the fire lives right there. So we're monitoring this continuously, and every single firefighter, our first training is fire weather. That's the first thing we study as a firefighter. Before we even study hand tools, before we even look into that, we look into fire weather. That changing environment is really important. Let's say, I'm a radio operator, I don't have to worry about that. Well, you do. Let's say you're responding to the Ohio train disaster, and suddenly you find yourself with a wind shift and you're downwind to that. Do you want to be downwind to that? Are you still going to be responding to that if you're downwind to that? And so that's when it's important to set the IC up in the right place, where basically operations is going to originate from, but that may change because of the weather. So that's really important as well. So think about that as a radio operator. Conflict and previous errors. If you've had a conflict with somebody, are you able to set that aside and still do your job? And then previous errors. I know from personal experience I've made mistakes on the fire line. And then I find it haunting the rest of my thoughts for the rest of the day. And it's like you got to slap yourself across the face and go, let it go. It didn't matter. Nobody got hurt. All right, that's the key right there. No one got hurt. The fire didn't get out. So that's what's important when we're burning. And again, control burning is primarily what we do. And then it's important to recognize with the stress reaction, there's an alarm reaction. Oh, that type of thing. There's a resistance. Not a big deal. Just some resistance to it. And then there's eventual exhaustion. You can only go through that circle so many times before you're exhausted from it. And that's why we train, is because it increases our resistance to it. And that's what training is all about. All right, so tactical communications. I'll just do a little story here. The shortest tactical communications I've ever had. It was under the gun, and it saved my life. So, set the stage. September 11th of 2001, I was working for the Air Force. I have about 13 years with the military. I was a contractor, stateside only. Been privileged to work at Bragg, AP Hill, mostly at Arnold, a little bit at Fort Campbell. Then I went on to work for the state after that. Well, when I was there on September 11th, 01, that's another story, but about a week later, we were approved to go back out onto the property and work. Primarily what I did was land management. So during the field season, we were doing survey work, and then during the burning season, we were burning. Of course, if you know anything about Tennessee weather, you really only get a handful of days in the spring and the fall to burn, so it was always a part-time job. Well, I'm basically got approval to go out, and my hand crew is out, and we're basically on site. I got a white SUV and a white pickup truck with my crew. We're parked on the road near the security area, but still on the base, but outside the security area. And my crew dives off in the woods. I'm getting a few pieces of equipment ready to take and do some work with, and I hear a helicopter coming. And before I realized it, that helicopter was on me. And I was like, hey, that's an Apache. Well, the Apache was running patrol at the Air Force Base, which we'd never seen one there before because, I don't know if you know anything about Arnold, but it's I think they call it Area 52 is the term for it. There's a lot of top secret stuff going on there. And so this helicopter was there, and I'm like, hey, I built one of those models when I was a kid. I was excited to see this, but I'm looking at him and going, he ain't here to say hello. So my hands go up in the air. I mean, what else are you going to do when this thing flies up on you right there? That's all you can do. It's just that. And I remember building the model, and I remember, oh, it's got this cool chain gun on the bottom of it. Well, this is called an M230. It's a 30 millimeter, and it can fire up to 600 rounds a minute. Except this was not the view I had of it, okay? That was the view I had of the chain gun right there. And I'm still like this, and I didn't know what else to do because I'm like, I can't have a conversation with this pilot in my current condition. So I had a radio, it was a Motorola, right here in my belt. And I had my hands up, I pointed my fingers down, and I reached down, and I grabbed the radio. This is, again, the shortest conversation I've ever had. Keyed it up and said, Fitch to operations. He instantly turned and left. That's all it took.
You said what again?
Fitch to operations. That's my last name. And that basically is the shortest conversation I've ever had. What did it communicate? I was legit because I broke squelch on a secure frequency, which means I had a radio for secure frequency, and that's all they needed right there. And he was gone. And that's the last I saw of him, thankfully, that day. But that was a unique opportunity, having worked on the Air Force base at that time. It was, Air Force, and you never know what you're going to see in these facilities. But that's sort of the lead into what tactical communications is. It's not a rag chew, as we know. So we heard rag chews on the radio. I think Ted was talking about showing up on time. Really good. I love the things you were saying about that. If you can't be on time, be early. That was a great conversation this morning. But that's not necessarily a tactical communication. That's rag chewing, just having a good time on the radio. That's not what a net is all about. What's communicated? In the case of the helicopter, contact was all they needed on a secure frequency. That was it. But contact often is like my burn boss will be like, Sam, or Kevin, this is Sam, and I'll key up and I'll say, hey, Sam, I'm just basically 100 yards west of drop point 2. He goes, good, I just checking on you. And that's it. That's all that needs to happen with that. Sometimes he'll just say copy, and we'll move on because he's just checking where I'm at. He wants to make contact because I've been alone for an hour or something doing some work over there. What the conditions are. Again, weather. I'm reporting weather continuously. So those conditions are changing. Is there a snag on fire? Has it slopped over? Resource requests. I need a gator at drop point 2. With 2 guys in a rake and 1 flapper. This is a fire rake right here. I'll just leave the cover on it. This is kind of the tool of choice in this part of the world. You probably have heard of the Pulaski, which is like an axe with a blade like this and a blade like that, perpendicular to it. You might call it a Maddox here, except that this blade is an axe too, though, which is horizontally oriented. This fire rake is called a council rake, and it's just got kind of 4 megalodon teeth on it, if you will. 4 big pieces of metal right there. And that's the tool of choice to have around here because of all of our oak litter. They have a tool called a mud flapper or flapper, which is basically a mud flap on a stick. And you take it, you don't flap with it. It's a laugh if you ever see one doing that, because structure guys, you give them one of those and they want to flap them. But if you take it and run it like a mop, it never comes off the ground, but you run it back and forth like a mop. And you can use it to smother fire in short grass. It works really well for that. So that would be a potential resource request. When I say that, I need the gator, which I know I have 80 gallons of water in it. It's 4-wheel drive, and it carries 2 people. Weather conditions, obviously you guys know about that. As you know, most of the nets around here are weather oriented. Safety zones. Now we communicate those. Where is a safety zone? It could be in the rocky glade in the middle of the site. It's anything in the black. The roads are safety zones around here. You know, as a ham radio operator, it may not seem relevant to you, but you know, where's your command post at? Is it in a safe zone? What's your backup to that? Those are things to think about. As individuals at our homes, is the second or third floor of your house the best place to be when that funnel cloud is near you? No, you need to be underneath the stairs in the first floor if you can get there, or in your basement if you got one. Instrument readings are communicated. You guys are really good at that, as basically the doing the net control stuff for the Skywarn, and then briefings and debriefings. I love it when you do your shift changes for net control over the air, because as a participant, I'm mostly a silent observer. You know, that's kind of the idea of it. You're listening, and you only get on there when you got something to report. That's what tactical communications is all about, is really listening. But when you do a shift change on the air, it really communicates a lot to me, because I get to hear kind of behind the scenes what's going on, what are some logistical considerations that are being made, and so on. Does that make sense? All right, so let's look at, these are our watch out situations and our fire orders. Most of us have these more or less memorized, not necessarily in order. You need communications for every single one of these, and we'll just do a couple of them for interest of time. Fire aggressively, but provide for safety first. I need communications to do that, because I got to tell other people if there's a safety concern. Initiate all actions based on current and expected fire behavior. Back to weather. Fire behavior is dependent upon those three things: wind speed, and direction, relative humidity, that type of thing. Has to be communicated. We'll just get down to closer to the bottom. Stay alert. Communications is part of that. Keep calm, think clearly, and act decisively. You can't act if you don't have the comms to follow up on it. So let me give you an example of this. So we were on a fire about a month ago up at Long Hunter State Park, which most of you know of. It was a 480 acre fire. It was controlled burn. And we had a slop over in one area, because even oak litter on the forest floor this time of year, you can blow 40-mile-an-hour winds over it and it will stay there. But once you set it on fire, it'll mobilize in 1-mile-an-hour wind. It'll pick up and roll across the fire break. And that's what happened here. We call them fire brands, B-R-A-N-D-S, brands. And it rolled across the fire break. The less experienced firefighter who was on the torch, we often do that to give them experience, especially it was an easier fire. And we had plenty of crew. He got on the radio and he said, "Oh, it's crawling across the line over here." But he did it in a very calm way. And I was over further up out of the smoke doing the weather. You got to be out of the smoke to do weather. You can't do this while smoke's blowing on you. It'll give you false readings. So I was up there doing that, and I heard him. He was very calm about it. And I was like, okay. I just kept on doing what I was doing. But I didn't realize it slopped over, and it was already like 10 by 20 feet. And we ended up, getting up there, having some technical issues because we didn't have any flappers. We only had the rakes. Well, we happened to be in grassy fuel with oak litter in it. And you can scratch the oak litter away, but the grass stays in place. It was still burning. And so he needed to elevate the way he had communicated a little bit. And we'll talk about how you set that tone with the nonverbals. He was a little too calm with this. So we ended up, basically burning about 50 feet in one direction and probably 75 feet in another. So it took a little bit of effort, and we had to kind of slow everything down for a little while we took care of that slop over. All right, let's look at how we're going to mitigate some errors. We want to balance the way the sender and the receiver work together. I don't just talk at you. You have to listen. You don't just wait your turn to talk and not listen to me. Those are just some basics that we kind of know of. So these are some things you probably already know, but this kind of gives it some structure. As a sender, you're going to confirm that the information was shared and accurately received. What do we say as ham radio operators? QSL, right? 10-4, Roger, whatever that might be. If you didn't hear the information, you're going to ask for a fill. Or you might repeat it back to me, and then I can say QSL back to you. Then I know we have a good establishment in communications. If I'm talking to somebody over there and I can hear an engine running, I'll look for them to report back to me. Sender errors, letting the environmental distractions interfere, we mentioned. We'll kind of move through this a little bit. Giving too much information too fast, I'll try not to do that here since I only got 5 left. And then probably the last one on this, we'll see this come up again, is being disrespectful. So you guys can review this a little bit more, but think about the nonverbals with your communication. As a receiver, pay attention. Take notes. Don't just wait your chance to talk. And then ask for clarification. And then don't ignore the nonverbals. All right, defending yourself against looking ignorant or foolish. Own it if you do something wrong. And then blaming others when your message is misunderstood. That's a big one that can happen sometimes. You need to own that as well. Build a mental picture of the message. Make sure you're listening again. Recognize that perceptions and filters affect communication processes, and then be aware of unstated messages. Again, back to nonverbals. Direct communications. Well, we know indirect. That's a rag cue. Directly, if we're unsure of events, there's a safety concern. Break right in. Okay, if it's a 911 level emergency, call 911. If it's one step below that, do that break-in on the radio. If you have an answer to a question, do a break. We were talking about that during the power outages, during the real cold snap. I broke in and had an answer to a question somebody was asking on the air. And then time-sensitive information. Same kind of thing there. Use I statements as well as your call sign. I think this. This is what I'm seeing. Some of these we've been over before. How do we get our standard communication procedures? We got to listen. Listen, listen, as they say on ham radio. That's the first lesson we all get as ham radio operators, is listen. We all know how we communicate. It takes time to learn that, though. Listen to the way net control operates. Listen to what the kind of things they're talking about. Again, most of us probably know this in this room, but it's easy to take this and communicate with someone who's new. And then in terms of what we do, we carry these incident response pocket guides, IRPGs we call them. It's got everything in it, but really you need glasses to read it all. The font's like insanely small in it, but the burden of getting older. Brief others as needed. That's that net control shift change comment I made earlier. I really appreciate the way you do that. Consider doing after action reviews after your weather nets. Talk about what worked, what didn't. And this is important here. Let the junior members speak up, because they will ask you things that you didn't think about for 30 years. You know what I'm talking about when a child walks up to you and pokes you in the belly and goes, "You're getting fat." Okay, pretty blunt and to the point, but it's the truth, right? Okay. Communicate hazards, acknowledge messages, and then last but not least is acknowledge if you don't know something. Really ask about that. And all right, call sign K4KCF. I have an ARRL.net email address. If you want this presentation, I can email you the PDF of it. So no problem there. Well, thank you guys for the time. I'll leave the equipment up here if you have any questions on that. These are great little harnesses, little chest rig. The search and rescue guys with state parks like them because they can carry their service pistol in here. And then also they put their radios and a few other pieces of equipment in it when they're doing search and rescue stuff. So we use them on the fire line as well. All right. Thank you, folks.